In the hazy backrooms of Texas bars and beneath the neon lights of rock's most outrageous nights, Billy Gibbons forged his legend, a bearded hero with a guitar sound heavy enough to slice steel. But beneath the charm and blues bravado was a razor-tongued devil with an elephant's memory. Now at 75, Gibbons finally spoke out about the 5 artists he secretly detested. From a southern rock nemesis who took it too far to a pop icon who drove him to the brink, these bombshells reveal the feuds that defined his legacy. Authenticity was never something Billy Gibbons debated. It was the pedigree of every note he ever played. Blues wasn't something he saw as a marketing gimmick or a trend to appropriate. It was life, something made up of sweat, heartache, and sleepless nights in smoky bars. That's why, when Garth Brooks exploded onto the scene during the early 90s wearing his slick cowboy hat and his highly groomed country blues persona, Gibbons allegedly rolled his eyes so hard you could almost hear it from Houston. Brooks was the new Nashville's poster boy, arena-fitted country made up to sell on radio, television, and the suburban living room. His music had blues phrasing hints, but there was no soul. To Gibbons, it was emotionless imitation. Another Texas radio personality who had Billy on his show in 1993 describes Gibbons as ruling out Nashville boom as the kind of blues you can spill on your boots without staining them. That comment went round music circles like a wildfire. Fans chuckled, Nashville didn't. The irony was, Brooks had frequently name-checked ZZ Top as an early influence. He respected their swagger, their southern taste, and the way they melted genres before anyone else was brave enough to do so. But when Brooks started blending country pop with Texas blues flavors, Gibbons was said to have been insulted. "That man's got all the polish, but none of the dust," he said to another guitarist backstage at a Dallas show. "He's playing barbecue sauce music, sweet, bottled, and good for TV." The tension finally boiled over at the 1991 American Music Awards, when Gibbons and Brooks crossed paths in the same green room. Witnesses said Brooks, all geniality and good nature, approached Gibbons with a handshake and a smile. "Man, I love your stuff," he told him. Billy nodded curtly, tight-lipped, and responded, "Glad to hear it. Don't wear it out." The atmosphere grew thick. Brooks made light of it, but people around him said Gibbons didn't smile. In later interviews, Gibbons stopped short of naming individuals, but his tone explicitly spoke about whom he was referring to. He grinned when asked about the state of present-day country music and declared, "There is country, and there is counterfeit country." Just one of the pair possessed the sense of heartbreak and diesel. The fans instantly made connections. The Nashville Pretender, which Brooks was subsequently nicknamed by the media, had struck a chord. The distance between them musically could not have been greater. And on the one hand, Brooks was bringing in the crowds with his power ballads, choreographed light displays, and all the trimmings that went with them. And on the other, Gibbons remained in search of purity of tone, a kind that emerged from very ancient amplifiers and nearly broken guitar strings. The enormous success of Brooks was, in effect, a Can-Yam Gibbons looked at the business through perfection rather than passion, shine rather than grit. "The blues ain't supposed to sparkle," he told Guitar World in 1994. "If it does, somebody's peddling it, not playing it." To Gibbons, Nashville's culturally motivated attitude was outright heresy. The city of music had grounded its entire empire on the hook-laden song forms and the polished studio trickery. I.e., they had essentially domesticated the roughness of the southern music, which made it so authentic. In contrast, ZZ Top had always centered on the imperfections. Their grooves were greasy, their riffs raw, and their sound firmly human. Gibbons would say facetiously, "Nashville songs smell like perfume, but the blues smell like sweat." It was a joke, but not one. It was a manifesto. There were whispers of ill-buried feelings that persisted for quite some time. The moment Brooks decided to announce news of a roots blues album during the late 90s, several Nashville writers reported that Gibbons had reportedly rejected a comment. However, it was rumored that in private Billy was severely distressed by the situation. "They're calling it blues again," he reportedly told a friend. "It should be called what it really is, just marketing with a twang." In 2001, it was via Brooks that Gibbons was asked to appear at a live performance, a so-called blues tribute for a TV special. Gibbons, with dignity, refused the offer and gave a now legendary quote, "The blues don't wear rhinestones." The quote was able to rally the blues establishment of fans who saw the transgression of Nashville as the end of artistic integrity. The name was autographed onto T-shirts by the fans. Brooks, as lauded, never reacted, although accounts state that he felt the sting of criticism and was thereby wounded. Gibbons wasn't completely railing on Brooks. He was simply along for the issue. Garth to him was simply the epitome of the whole perpetrators who had taken over the sound he enjoyed. "It ain't that the man can't sing," Gibbons once stated in the rare open and candid radio interview. "It's that he's singing about heartbreak with a $1,000,000 grin." That was the line that described their difference in philosophies, the unspoken war between earnestness and mass appeal. In reality, both men embodied two extremes of the American dream. Brooks was the performer, the master of touch with spectacle. Gibbons was the artist, true to the origins that made him. But in the Texan bluesman's view, the path to truth wasn't a long music row. It was a long sweat, dust, and heartache, not spotlight ticker tape. But whereas Garth Brooks' commercially friendly country did not sit well with Gibbons, the second betrayal struck home. Blues in Texas is not a genre, it's a blood bond. The musicians who filter up through smoky clubs and backroom jam sessions create a fraternity based on respect, tone, and honesty. That's why the tale of Billy Gibbons and Stevie Ray Vaughan was so heartbreaking. They were not enemies initially. In fact, Stevie has even referred to Billy as his hero in the past. But what had started out as respect gradually turned into competition, and, as those who know Gibbons best attest, deep feelings of betrayal which he harbored for years. They first met in the early 1970s, many years before either man was a familiar face. Stevie, still in his early 20s, was a famished kid lurking around the fringes of Austin's music scene, learning Gibbons like a catechism. "He used to sneak into our gigs and stand by the amps," Gibbons once recalled in an interview. "Didn't say much, just watched and learned." And learn he did. Stevie picked up Gibbons' heavy Texas shuffle, his searing tone, even his swagger. To Billy, it was flattering at first. By the early 1980s, Vaughan had exploded onto the national stage. His debut album, Texas Flood, wasn't just a hit, it was a declaration. The world was calling Stevie Ray Vaughan the new king of Texas blues. Magazine covers hailed him as the savior of the genre, a title that didn't sit well with Gibbons, who had been flying that flag for 2 decades. He didn't like the idea of people saying Stevie brought Texas blues to the world, said ZZ Top's old engineer Joe Hardy. Billy felt like he'd been doing that since before Stevie even had a guitar. The first signs of tension appeared in 1984 when a reporter asked Gibbons if he had an opinion about Stevie's rise. The always chill to the shades, Gibbons declared, "The kid can play." But those close to him disclosed that his tone was even colder than friendly. It was said that Gibbons, meanwhile, was grumbling that Stevie's tone was a little too close, especially the strong, heavy sound that Vaughan achieved with his Stratocaster and Tube Screamer setup. This setup of Riggs was nearly a carbon copy of Billy's own rig years earlier, part of the reason for the gripe. Matters worsened when Stevie's management allegedly solicited advice from Bill Ham, the producer for ZZ Top, as to finding a proper studio for Steven. "Billy felt that was a line crossed," said a veteran roadie. "He said to me, 'That boy is not only encroaching into my space, he is attempting to wear my boots.'" Gibbons, the individual who was always backing the upcoming generations of artists, was speechless when it came to Vaughan. He countered Flat's commendations in his interviews as a rule until the 11th hour when he was cornered to remission or assuming the opposing role, and even then his responses were brief, tentative, and faultlessly courteous, as if he were frigid rather than outright critical. The tension at last reached its boiling point during the 1985 Montreux Jazz Festival, to which both men were invited. Gibbons had been on the wish list of the festival for years, as Stevie was just attempting to receive global acclaim after being booed there in '82. A backstage anecdote mentioned that Stevie approached Billy and informed him that he was his inspiration. Gibbons nodded, gave a thin smile, and said, "You learn fast." Then he just walked away. The virtually unseen transaction was part of Texas blues lore. Still, Its shortness was amazing. In addition, there was much discussion about a studio session that would never come about. Stevie wanted to record the dual guitar jam with Gibbons, a symbolic passing of a torch, but had to turn it down due to scheduling issues. Insiders report that he told his friends in private, "I don't pass the torch to someone who's already got my flame." It wasn't hatred per se. It was pride and the sting of recognizing a student already teaching in the public eye. Soul to Soul did actually chart in 1985, which already had critics labeling Von the heir to Hendrix. Meanwhile, the band ZZ Top were basking in their MTV hits, which were decadent, synthesizer-laden, and really the antithesis of the down-and-dirty blues that made them famous. This was a hot topic of debate among fans who just kept questioning what real Texas music was. "That made Billy nuts," declared a longtime friend. He respected Stevie's ability, but he hated how people employed him as a measuring stick to compare him to ZZ Top. Still, despite the bitterness and jealousy, Gibbons never badmouthed Vaughn. Stevie died in 1990 in a fatal accident, and Gibbons was the first to make a statement. He was a tone brother, and Texas lost its best. Phrases like these from a rock star would have been taken as genuine by the fans and false by his close companions. Yet somehow they were stating that Billy was tormented for years afterwards, both because of the loss and because of everything that could not be said. He never got closure, Hardy said. He wanted to indicate to Stevie how much he respected him, but he also wanted to tell him to back off. Now he could never do that. Gibbons had demonstrated his respect in subtle ways for those future years. At many ZZ Top performances in the 1990s, he would occasionally insert small excerpts from Pride and Joy or Texas Flood into his solos, with a silent nod to the person who had once looked up to him. And then there was the rivalry. But despite this, those movements were still tinged with bitterness, and did the same thing as grieving for the dead. Billy didn't despise Stevie, a Texas musician explained. He despised what they had endured, that soul bond which was shared between the two of them, and time wasn't even necessary for communication. But if competition with Stevie Ray Vaughan pushed Gibbons' pride to its limits, this next musician destroyed his patience. 3. Lynyrd Skynyrd's Ronnie Van Zant, ****. To most fans, the idea of ZZ Top and Lynyrd Skynyrd at odds is unthinkable. Two Southern giants founded on the same premise of grit, guitars, and whiskey-drenched defiance. But behind the veil of smoky theaters and screaming crowds, things were less angelic. Billy Gibbons and Ronnie Van Zant may have loved the South, but they fought over something far more profound, the very soul of Southern rock itself. And when egos clashed on the highway, that brotherhood became a war zone. The saga had started in 1974, when ZZ Top's Tres Hombres was still riding the charts and Skynyrd was taking off on the back of Sweet Home Alabama. Bookers fantasized about a double bill, two giants from Texas and Florida who would bring together the South in one thundering banner of guitars. On paper, it was ideal. In reality, it was disaster waiting to happen. They were like oil and gasoline, remembered one tour manager, who worked for both groups. Billy wanted control, precision, groove. Ronnie wanted fire, sweat, and whiskey on stage. They were both right and both stubborn. Initially, Gibbons was in awe of Van Zant's coolness. Ronnie was raw and fearless, the type of frontman who could get 10,000 to obey with a smile and a beer